It's not what they think it is. And they told her at the time that it was this amyloid thing. They don't know where it comes from. They knock around Agent Orange, but they don't want to say Agent Orange. They don't want to come right out and say it. Probably because there's a lawyer in the next room. But she came out of the oncologist, and she told me that it's amyloid, and she's got a year. Well, that year turned into 3 years, and she was out. You got to go to Wegmans twice a week, and she didn't really start getting bad till probably the middle of last summer. Then up around Christmas time, she was not good at all. She told me that she'd never see another spring, and she was getting tired of being tired. And then it just kind of went downhill from there. But we had Carol coming up from Pennsylvania that last couple of days. Barb Monticello. They got Linda very comfortable, and the grandkids were there. Our kids were there, and she would just. And Nancy called, and they told us that the last thing to go in a person like this is the hearing. So I don't know who went through the living room.
I went through the living room.
And I told her, tell Linda that Nancy is calling. And probably 2 minutes after that, she was gone. It was like she was waiting for her sister to call. Her older sister that didn't run everything, but so she went out easy, and it was hard, but we're pretty much getting over it. And I want to tell you one more thing. When you leave here today, you see that stump out in front? You see that flower pot on that stump? And any of you see her before I see her, don't tell her I put that flower. She told me I could move right out of the house by doing that. So that's all I got. I'm glad that all you people can go. I really am. It means a lot to us.
Tell about the book.
Oh, there's a book here and some pens. If you people would care to sign anything or say anything, and just pass it on. The tray comes around later. Carol wants to say something. I think that's next in line. Carol? This is Carol Stickle, who spent a lot of time in Vietnam with Linda. When she had been up here, and Linda was picked up a little bit. Carol was on her way back to Lewisburg when Linda took a dive the other direction. And we told Carol she wasn't quite back to Lewisburg.
Like half an hour.
Turned right around, come right back up here. We're so glad she was here. So anyway, Carol?
Well, I was privileged to know Linda, and our friendship spans 52 years. We first met in college in 1967, and you can imagine, we were both older. I had graduated from nursing school, and Linda was a sophomore. And Miss Sett, the dorm mother, you didn't get requests from her. She told you what you were going to do. Miss Sett, just the name. And she said, there's a student coming in. I want you to take her around and introduce her to people. And they had some kind of dorm social that evening that we could get to know who the people were in the dorm. And well, you can imagine how that set with Linda. She was not one to be, out there in front and introducing and all this kind of stuff. But our friendship really started from there. I think we were a little more, at least we felt we were more mature than the rest of the underclassmen that were there, and we were years older. And years when you're in your late teens and early 20s is a pretty big gap. Linda was poor as a church mouse going to college. She didn't have a lot of money at all to spend. Some people from the Alliance Church sent money from time to time, and we could go out and get a hamburger or do something like that. But she had 2 jobs while she was working her way through college, and none of it was cash. It was all applied to her tuition. And so one of her jobs was, that one was cash, was she did the term papers for many of the students. So that meant before the end of the semester, when exams are coming up and term papers, Linda was several days done and ready for her own. And then she would, I don't know how much she charged a page, but she would pull all-nighters typing those papers so that she could earn money to apply on her tuition. The other thing is, she was a teacher's aide. Now, she served 2 teachers on different years, and the one teacher was an old retired missionary. He's a good teacher, but when it came down to tests, he would have Linda correct the tests. Now, his tests were not true and false, and they weren't multiple choice that you could check, if it was wrong. They were paragraphs and paragraphs. They had to write essays, little mini essays for these questions. And so Linda was there, and the footnotes had to be there and everything, and she was correcting all these papers. And she was great. She started grading her. She was, this word would be more suitable than that word, and if they spelled wrong, and she did the whole thing that the professor should have done. But she never told me that until after, it was years later. I did that. I said, you graded their papers. Did they know? No. So that was, and another one, she served as a teacher's aide for one of the others. His tests were a little more reasonable, multiple choice and that kind of thing. She was such a good friend and a loyal friend. There was no one more loyal than Linda. When she graduated from Toccoa, she went up to York Hospital School of Nursing, which is where I graduated. And I was working, following graduation from Toccoa, I was working at the hospital there, so we saw each other. And she would come home with me on weekends the first year. And then I left. I applied to the Alliance, and they said, where do you want to, do you have a preference? I said, don't, just send me where they need a nurse. And so they said Vietnam, and I said, oh, okay. And it felt right. It just felt right. And when Linda graduated, she also did the same thing. She wanted to be a missionary, and so they said, where do you want to go? And she applied open. You send me where they need a nurse. And they sent her to Vietnam. Now, they had multiple clinics the Alliance had in Vietnam, and we thought they were planning on sending her to one of the other clinics. But it just so happened in the clinic that was developing in Delotte, I was kind of working out of a soapbox and seeing patients, and we had the privilege of having a huge clinic with a laboratory and x-ray facilities, everything we needed, inpatients, and I was getting ready to go home on furlough, and so they wanted a nurse there, and she was the one available, and we were, hey, she's coming to Delotte. So she ended up in Delotte, and we were housemates along with another friend of ours, and she was there to help with developing the clinic. Just kind of crazy things you wouldn't have to think about doing here in the States. But one day I was walking through when they were doing the showers, and the light switch for the shower was right where the water hit. Oh no. And there were just multiple things like that, just walking through the clinic. While we were working at that, Linda was studying her second language. She learned Vietnamese when she was for 10 months, and then prior to moving to Dalat. And then she studied the tribal language, Kaha, which is totally different. The tribal people are different linguistically, racially, in every way. Even their religions are different. The Vietnamese are Buddhist, and the tribal people are animistic. And so it was just a whole different culture from being totally Vietnamese culture where she was. Just 10 months of Vietnamese, and down there watching the supervising and development of the clinic, learning a new language, Kaha, and just working and making trips to villages. We would have the military take us out in a chopper because some roads were not safe to drive. And they would tell us if there was, I was telling Aaron that if there was a plague, like bubonic plague, fleas hatch every 6 months. And the fleas are, out in the village, and they would bite people and they would get plague. And we would rush down. The military gave us the plane ride and medicines to treat the patients. And it was a difference between life and death for that village. And there were other, when people got cerebral malaria, and there were a lot of diseases that were wiped out here in the States for practical purposes. And we were in the middle of that. Seeing patients, language study, supervising in the clinic, and it was a very hectic and busy time. One of the other things was the impact that Linda made in the hearts and lives of the people she touched. She did with me in the way she served. She was, as you who know her, she's very humble, but she was a great nurse. I mean, she knew her business. She was the baby whisperer in the clinic. And the child that John was talking about was like 1.5 years and weighed 12 pounds. And he was starving. The tribal people are matrilineal. The Vietnamese are patrilineal. That means the family name goes with the daughter. And when a couple get married, they move in with the daughter's family. And so many of the children that we took in that were ailing, that could not survive on the diet that they had, were boys, because they could not afford to spend the fortunes of the family on one child, unless it was the daughter who was going to be their insurance policy for old age. And so a lot of the children we had in the clinic, and Linda just nursed that kid back to life. Held him, carried him around, he ate with us, he slept, we had got a crib, and he slept in our home because the clinic wasn't quite open yet. And there was another child that we had moved in with, and he was 4 years old and weighed 16 pounds. He was skin and bones. And he could not sleep at night unless he held a food bar in each hand. And sometimes when he'd wake up, and he would take a few chomps. It was amazing. What was the other? Oh, twins. we called them Peter and Paul. I don't remember what their real names were, but we got another crib when they were there, so we had these two boys, and they were starving. And I want you to know, about 10 years ago, in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a tribal church where there are a lot of tribal people settled in the Charlotte area, I met the parents of Peter and Paul. And they came up and they cried and wanted to hug me, and they asked my Lote Linda, where's my Lote Linda? And if it wouldn't be for her, we wouldn't have had our boys. And they're married. They emigrated to the United States, and healthy and strong, and it's just, I don't think I could run out of stories of the change she made. Just her impact with the people and their love for her, because they know when you're just doing a job or when your heart is in it, and her heart was totally involved. Right before we opened clinic, we took a trip to Bami Tuit. In 1968, 5 missionaries were martyred there in our mission team, and several were captured and taken on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And so we wanted to see the memorial of this burial site. Well, we were down there, and there were no screens on the windows of the place we stayed. And my mother had come to spend a year with us, so she was there. And my mother and I were in one bed, and Linda was in a cot. And the mosquito net was down, and she had bites all along her arms. And she developed malaria. And the type of malaria they have in Vietnam was a very deadly form. And maybe a week or so after we got back to Dalat, she became very sick. And it got worse. It was deadly sick. And they thought that, we thought she was dying, is what it was. And so we ended up, someone got us, through a dignitary, got us a helicopter ride to the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital in Saigon. And when we got in there, the nurse and the doctor were looking down at her and said, well, Blackwater fever, that's a one-way street. And I don't know how many times what did you think when they were talking over your body? That's a one-way street. She said, I was so sick I didn't care. And typical Linda answer. And but she survived. And she was just getting her strength back and had all the responsibility of the clinic. We had 4 nurses, a pharmacist, a receptionist, 3 maintenance men, a chaplain, and we were setting up interviews to interview 10 other applicants for working in the clinic. And she ended up with infectious mononucleosis. And anyone who knows Linda, no matter what's going on, she didn't stop, as sick as she was, and I had to leave. And she carried that load. She carried that load. And when they had babies, she did the all day and was up during the night looking after them. And it broke her health. And it was, when I got back, I found out that she was going to go home. And I think that she was really brokenhearted, and she kind of just turned everything about Vietnam off for a number of years. And it wasn't part of her thinking or part of anything. I think it maybe hurt too much to think about and deal with. And it was sometime later, we had kind of a gap of 33 years in our relationship where we would have phone calls back and forth occasionally and 2 visits. she was so thrilled when Sarah was born, and she and John came down and she wanted me to see Sarah. And then they were down in Florida and stopped when I lived there. At any rate, after a number of years, I think our faith got sidetracked. And I'll never forget the morning she sat at the top of the steps and was in tears. And I said, Linda, what's wrong? And she said, I was the lost sheep, and he wouldn't let me go. He came and found me. And it was a sea change in her life. From that point on, her faith escalated and grew. And fortunately, she had a lot of more difficult things to go through. And she had the faith to help sustain her through those difficult days. Open heart surgery. For someone who was a nurse who hadn't seen a physician in 15 years. And, well, that's for sick people. She was... Anyway, she went through that and did well. And then the last one was with the bone marrow malignancy. And I could see, and maybe you all who were close to her recognize that the weaker her body grew, the stronger her faith grew. And she just rolled with it. She felt, one of the things, she didn't have a lot of pain. She had pains for other things that normal older people get, but not pain from the malignancy of her bone marrow. It was profound fatigue. Just getting up to do anything. It affected every organ in her body. Swallowing. She couldn't eat anymore. More liquid stuff. And she just continued to lose more of what she was able to do. But when you saw her, all you would see is she's thinner, but she put her game face on. Whenever she was around the family, when she'd go to the sisters thing, and I said, what did you eat? Well, I didn't want, I took a few things. I hope Karen didn't notice that she put them out somewhere, and she couldn't swallow. And she didn't want to tell everyone, and always be talking about her symptoms. And she just lived strong as long as she could. And she had a deep love for her family and her children. She just would do anything for them. And her sisters were a great source of encouragement to her. She loved her sisters. And I think that it kind of suits a book Linda got by Max Lucado, Safe in the Arms of the Shepherd, the 23rd Psalm. And I just kind of read down through the lines that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And I know that she would say that. She said, I don't care if I ever get better. I feel that the Lord is with me, and I feel him with me. I'm okay. And that was, I don't know how many times she said that. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord. So you don't have to wonder where Linda is. She's with the Lord. To be absent from the body, for those who know the Lord, is to be present with the Lord. And I know that so many times she would say, I don't know why the Lord just doesn't take me. And then other days she can't. I have to see my children and my grandchildren grow up. I want to be around and see them grow and mature and develop. She just loved her kids and her grandchildren. But she's watching you now. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And it's just like when Christ was on the cross and he said to the thief who wanted salvation, he said, "This day you will be with me in paradise." And so when Linda fell asleep, she woke up in heaven with the Lord.
I'm Fran, if any of you don't know.
What?
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 I am the second oldest grandchild of Grandma, and I was told that anyone who would like to say any words about Grandma can come up now and say them. And yeah.
I can't talk in front of people.
You did all right, girl.
You did.
You just did.
That's my girl. There you know.
You don't even have to go up front. You can just anything you guys want to say, go for it. If not, that's fine too.
You want to drink?
I always want to drink. Well, we are going to play one of Mom's hymns, favorite hymns. You gotta just give us a second to get together. Can I have my glass? I went to Greece for 2 weeks and I did not practice, so I apologize. They're probably much more on the ball than I am.
Excuses, excuses.
Never mind, I didn't practice either. Yeah, I'm gonna steal these chairs so we can have like music stands on.
All right, that didn't work out so well.
Oh, that's hot.
Tuck it down. Well, I told you not to wear short skirts. Not my problem. This is all we've got. Oh, thank God. Oh, I sniffle. Oh, it is a little warm. Okay, we're gonna play in the garden. I was told all the sisters know this, so I don't expect you to be looking at words.
We need a leader.
And if you know, everyone wants to sing along, the words are right on that little sheet right there. Ready? Slow. Wait a minute, is it down, down, up? Okay, ready? Hang on. I'm not gonna be the only one playing. Here.
Sorry.
We're super organized. Oh, that's awesome. Thanks.
In the garden. Give me the room first.
Okay, ready? Hold on.
Was I too?
You're gonna end us?
Hurry up, you only got 25 seconds. 20.
I've been listening to that tune all weekend, and I'll tell you right now, today is the best. I think the chorus there in the middle was. So I thank you for coming.